Okay. So to go over, kind of recap, before I start, any questions about this topic? Anybody processing the information outside of class? Or do you get out of here and you're like, oh shit, I'm glad that's over? How many of you are thinking about it at least? It's kind of making you maybe observe yourself and maybe others and think differently about kind of our own history as human beings, right? Kind of cool. It's kind of cool. So I'm going to go through this really quickly. You don't need to necessarily know all of this. There will be classes if you are in kinesiology and nursing and you were going to need to know all this. But I don't expect you to know it all for this class. You just need to understand the concept. Basically, we're all animals. We're not special. We aren't unique. Every animal is unique, right? Which makes us not necessarily. There are differences, right? But there's a ton of similarity. So when we look at fight or flight, flock, fawn, all those different ways that we handle the perception of threat that we can't handle or that we can handle, there's a process involved. Just remember, sympathetic nervous system stimulates kind of it's an excitatory thing, right? It excites the body. Stress is excitatory. Even if you are in freeze, even if you're paralyzed, you're still excited. Your heart rate is still pumping, right? Hair still stands up on end. Eyes still dilate. Tunnel vision. Your breathing still kind of starts to increase. It can happen so quickly. It doesn't really take very much. Even with like class presentations, how many of you like stutter when you're presenting, like can't form words, can't think straight when you're fighting with someone that you care about? Like if you're being attacked, how many of you by raise of hands have like all of a sudden forgot all the things you were going to say? And then later, when your nervous system kind of starts slowing down again, you're like, damn it, I should have said this, I should have done that, right? Your processing changes. So people that are stuck in fight or flight or anxiety have a real difficult time processing, formulating logic, right? Because a lot of what you're doing in fight or flight is just impulse. It's impulsive. Some of this is hardwired into our primitive mechanisms. And those mechanisms are there for a reason. So you're not weird or you're not bad. There's nothing wrong with you. Those mechanisms function for a reason. They evolved there for a reason. There is nothing new in human society today in terms of that response, period. So when we talk about suffering in anxiety, it's the same as my suffering in anxiety. It's the same as your suffering in anxiety. It's the same. This is why they can use medication. It's not like they have a special medication just for you. It's the same medication, right? They might change dosing, quantities. They might play with that. But in general, it's the same central nervous system, same brain, same spinal cord, same adrenals, same liver, pancreas, same glucose, same all the things, right? So I think it's really important to recognize that when you're having a human experience, you're not alone. In fact, how many humans that have been on this planet for however hundreds of thousands of years, if not millennia, have experienced this, right? This response, fight, flight. Biologically, there's a reason why the eyes dilate. Biologically, while the gut stops digesting, why you don't salivate as well, why you have digestive problems under stress, right? Is it really when the diet industry tells you, oh my God, it's the glyphosate, is it? Or is it the fact that you're under stress? Is there a bigger context? A lot of problems in the health industry, and I use the word industry because it's capital, it's capitalized, especially in the United States, massive capitalistic system there. They want to capitalize on anything they can that would give them authority over your health. Because if they have authority, where does your money go? To that business. right? It's beneficial, and some of the information may be distorted. It could be biased. It could be completely erroneous. It could be based on terribly done research because the research wasn't done in an academic setting, right? So I work in the health industry. I capitalize on that, right? I capitalize on helping people feel good physically and mentally as a life coach, right? So I'm totally capitalizing on it because I live in this system. So I don't want to come across like I'm demonizing it, but you need to question when someone says your symptom is based in a vacuum, right? Which means isolated from any influence from this one thing. It's the gluten, really? Because what if you are in a relaxed state eating the same thing, you don't have that response, but in a stressed state, right? Look at the United States. Have you guys ever seen the map of the United States where the most obesity is, cardiac diabetes? Have you ever seen a map of that where it's all really primarily in the South? Primarily in the South. What are they eating that's any different than what the entire industry or entire United States is eating? Are they eating anything different, really, when it's all shared crop, right? Are their stores really providing anything different? So why would they have an exacerbated problem with maybe high blood sugar, high cholesterol, digestive problems? Why do you think that might be the case? Just think. Do you think maybe the poverty rate might be influencing that? Again, what is the foundation of psychological wellness, really? When you think about it, look at that pyramid. What is the foundation of fight, really what can trigger fight or flight? Physiological needs, if they're not met. The second one is environmental. Do you have access to healthcare? So when you think about poverty in the United States, don't you think that we know this biology? It's been around, right? It's been around for over a century. Over a century. This is Pavlov dogs, late 1800 physiology. We don't have a whole lot of new information. It's all the same, right? Maybe more detailed. So if you look at just poverty alone, you could predict in the United States over a chronic period of time, people living in societies that are having poverty will have higher rates of disease, especially chronic diseases of this type of situation, right? So it's always not necessarily the one thing that you saw on Instagram, or TikTok, and that you should be drinking 2 gallons of water, and oh, it's because they're lazy, or it's usually multifaceted, right? So this is an important thing for you as individuals and as a community to understand that these biological processes are meant to be there, but they might not have been evolved to be the default mode of how you exist. It's meant to be specific situations, right? So if we look at, again, the mental health of college students, I would expect there to be, because you're young, you don't have a chronic health problem yet, right? You don't necessarily have coronary heart disease because you've been in stress or in fight, right? Fight mode. A lot of people in fight mode have heart problems. A lot of people in fear mode. You could look at maybe and find associations to diabetes. Okay, so quickly, who knows right off the bat, what is it that triggers fight, flight, response, and anything in between in a person? What is it? What does it require? What are like 3 things that are required for fight or flight to be triggered? What's the first thing? I can't hear you. Did you guys hear that? You have to evaluate yourself against what? The perceived threat. That's how we determine if it's a threat. What can I handle? Here's the situation. Oh shit, I'm inferior to it. I'm smaller than it. I don't have a sense of capacity to handle it. So that's the next thing. A third thing that I talked about last week, what was the third thing that I added? Someone else. Thank you, but just say it, you know it. What's the third thing that might make stress more intense? Think of stress like a volume control. What would make that stress louder? Say it again.
Assumption
About what?
that we can't control it.
Well, that's the first thing. That's what we were just talking about. That's the assessment, right? You're comparing yourself and your sense of capacity to the perceived threat, right? That's the assessment.
Consequence.
The consequence. If the consequence is more radical, that stress is going to be felt much louder. That feeling of panic is going to be more intense, right? And so when that happens, you might become more impulsive, right? The more intense it is, the less time, because it does affect your sense of time. There's a sense of impending doom, right? It might get bigger. What happens to your logic if that volume or intensity of stress increases because you're perceiving, or the fact is the consequence if you don't succeed is really high. We're talking, go back to the hierarchies of need. The third one being belonging. If this happens, I will be shamed, shunned, disapproved of, seen as a failure. I will be excluded from the people I want inclusion from. Something pretty radical that way. They will never forgive me. I will always be seen as lesser than. The more intense, let's say, that third hierarchy of need is threatened, the more you're going to feel impelled to do something, right? More intensely. Any questions about that? So I go to my own story. For me, the more I believed, well, and there were layers of it, right? I had associated body fat, symbolized that as safety, security, inclusion, success, proving myself, third hierarchy of need. I'd attached my sense of security and inclusion, right, and belonging to my looks, my attractiveness, right? So if I didn't feel that I was meeting those standards physically, the feeling of inadequacy and the feeling of I'm a loser, I'm a failure was really intense for me. And so I impulsively would exercise at an extreme level to get rid of that, right? So that was the way I fought, right? And flee. I did all the things. If I were to stop that coping mechanism, then I would be left with I'm a loser, right? I'm a failure. I would have to sit there thinking I was getting larger. Again, that's the mental aspect of what I was dealing with. When I did that, if I were to be a failure, the ultimate feeling that arises is terror of the truth. That if I am worthless, what is the point, right? So when you go down through fight or flight, anytime you've experienced it, it always ends up being abandonment, rejection, disapproval, being alone. So if I work back, if I gain this body fat, I will have failed my own sense of security. Screw everybody else, I will have failed my own. Then they will find out that I suck. Ultimately, I will have no sense of value, right? If that happens, no one will want to be with me. No one will like me. My family will disapprove of me, right? So if you keep on going down, well, then what? Well, then I'll be alone. Why would that be so terrifying? The underlying feeling of being alone. Why would that be so freaking terrorizing to anybody? What is it linked to? Which hierarchy of need? Third, exactly. That's evolutionary. So it really comes down to some crazy primitive thing that developed over thousands of years in the freaking wilderness while I'm surrounded by people everywhere. Why am I experiencing all this terror? Well, it has to do with what I attached my sense of belonging to, right? So there's a whole lot more underneath that because there was a lot of other things like sexual assault that underlied my sense of shame because I was super religious, and that was sex before marriage, and then that meant I was terminally ruined. And I tried to feel better with body image. So the real underlying issue for me was that I wasn't able to comply to religious dogma. That was my issue, right? So underneath that was all this hidden information, but it was all based on the feeling that I am worthless, piece of shit, I'm a loser, no one loves me. And I lived in this state between these two, super intense. So to not go out and exercise or to diet brought up intense fight or flight response. I didn't know how to explain that to the therapist. I didn't know how to say, I feel like I'm literally going to get dismembered and heaved off of a cliff. Like it feels like I'm gonna not just die, but I'm going to be tortured to death. So the physical state I was in was extreme fight or flight. So that fear now was turned way up because the consequences for me were radical. Had I had any grace, self-compassion, right? Had I had any ability to say, you know what, those beliefs probably aren't working for you. The beliefs are really kind of messed up. They didn't give context to what happened to you. Like, had I had that rationality, I probably might not have had the same volume of stress involved with that. But that came after I had some insight. Okay, I'm going to go through this quickly. We already got that. So I want to go over this quickly because I think this is really fascinating. Anybody have trouble on the little quiz around these? Fight, flight, freeze? No? Okay. So fight is really great because it means you have at least some sense of ability to handle a loss, right? Or you don't have the choice because of the consequence. So fight requires this incredible amount of energy. It's actually really motivating and can be really positive. And we're going to go into that more in a little bit. Because having this fight response, again, it does mean that you are in some level in the esteem area, or you might be using esteem to position yourself socially. Like, I'm awesome, I'm amazing, and that's what makes me valuable, right? And that's where this comes in, right? Someone that believes that they are superior. Am I confusing you? Because I know I'm just puking information at you. Okay. If I am, don't hesitate to stop me and just say something. So it is a state of inflation. What are animals that inflate themselves when feeling stressed? A fish? What other animals try to make themselves look bigger? Yeah, I think that, yes, I'm pretty sure. Do they do that with fighting too? The feathers? How about a dog when their hair raises? Cats, have you seen a cat like, kind of funny memes of cats where their whole body kind of arches over? Someone mentioned a frog last week, how frogs can get really big. Humans do the same thing. We might not physically do it, but I would honestly, I'd be surprised if there is a physical, like maybe hair raising might be a form of that. But kind of inflating and kind of talking shit, which I love to do. I think it's fun. Is kind of like a fight response. Like, let's go, bring it. That could be really positive, especially in competition, right? Flight. Assessment, not gonna work, but I do think I can get away. I think I can get away with this, right? So lying. Right? Let's translate this because this is not as obvious this way anymore, right? Of course, when you see a bear, you've heard about it. You can visually compare your size with each other. And what's your probability of survival if a bear is hunting? Probably pretty low, right? Unless you have aid. So fleeing in, let's say, modern contemporary culture, again, would be lying is a way to try to get out of something. Let's think of some other ways that this might be the case. What's other ways that we kind of hide or excuse me, run from things? Yeah, like I think, and again, you can debate this. This is all kind of us thinking and processing. How does this translate? Avoiding, Hypervigilance might be, like a perfectionism could be a way to kind of avoid problems. Like, I don't want this thing I'm scared of to happen, so I'm gonna work extra hard to avoid that from happening. Again, you can see the positive, there might be positive benefits to that, right? However, living like that can feel terrible, overwhelming, exhaustion, right? Any other ideas? Staying busy? I guess I put them right down. Let's go, fleeing, escaping, right? Think of escape.
Could replacing also be a thought?
What's an example? What do you think?
I don't know, like, so, it's kind of a messy way, but it's like.
Totally. This is a great example. Yeah. This would be like, like if you break up with someone, or someone breaks up with you and you're feeling like shit about it, it feels like abandonment, rejection, disapproval, and all those negative feelings arise. And you're starting to have that anxiety and stress. You might be impelled, that's that being impulse, to do something about it because it doesn't feel good. You don't want to feel those feelings. So instead of developing a sense of ability, it might be easier in the moment to get on Tinder, to distract, right? Snapchat. How many friends do I have on Snapchat? Oh my God. Snapchat is kind of a big social thing, right? You can try to maybe compensate on Snapchat, obsessing over the person that might have broken up with you. Avoidance, like jumping to a new relationship, can absolutely be hiding and running away. Obsessive, again, I just listed on this. Like, I did this. This was my avoiding, right? Some people like, don't feel, let's go party, drink, sedate yourself a little bit, right? For me, for some people, it's a dieting thing, where a lot of dieters who restrict food when something stressful happens, that gives them like, let's go get food because in this moment it's too hard to restrict. There's actual reasoning behind that, but emotional eating or any type of emotional shopping, emotional, whatever you want to do, can be a way to flee. You're not actually fixing the situation though, right? Like if let's just say you want to nicotine, smoke a cigarette. Let's say you're having social anxiety. Like you're feeling a little insecure about yourself. You're worried you're not fitting in. You're feeling awkward. It might be easier to just suck on a vape, right? Because that's some way to kind of maybe medicate with nicotine, but you're also busy doing something. There's a busyness to it. So pay attention in your real life. Just pay attention without criticism or judgment. I think that's important. But as I'm going through all these, I'm not judging any of it. These are natural responses, but they also have consequences, this response, especially because we don't have such obvious triggers like a bear, right? Like being shunned from your community into the wilderness. That doesn't happen anymore, but you can be shunned on the interwebs, right? You can be shunned in social media. It's weird, right? You can feel excluded in your sorority or fraternity. Your family can kind of put you in a pecking order and you not know it until later that you see like, oh, maybe my family doesn't think I'm includable or whatever, right? So pay attention in your life, like, what do you do to avoid feelings? Hiding or trying to run away. Freeze response, paralysis. How many of you procrastinate? Freeze, yeah. There's something that's challenging in the moment, it feels overwhelming, postpone. That's kind of like a freezing response. This also is like invisibility. I think that one's a really interesting one. Trying to be invisible has its benefits, not gonna lie, right? Not sticking out, but in neither a good way or a bad way, right? I don't need to be the best. I don't want to be the worst. I just want to not be noticed. How many of you have that feeling? Sometimes it's actually a good strategy because it does give you some freedom. to just be natural if you're invisible. How else can people become invisible? I think that's something that, let's group think on that one. Besides avoiding, not going at all. Think of a social situation maybe that you might feel invisible. It might be good to feel invisible. This might be just compliance with body image, dress codes. Like, I just don't want to look different. Have any of you traveled the world besides those who are here from around the world? And I think I've mentioned this before. Like, if you were to go to Europe, do you really want to look American in Europe? Not to say there's anything wrong with being American. I'm just saying, like, do you want to look like obviously not from around there? Right, that's a natural response. That's a natural, biologically appropriate response anywhere. To just want to blend in to your background, right? So that would be something, maybe freezing. Freezing in the, and again, I know we talked about this, but freezing also can be apathetic. Apathy is when you feel hopeless. There's no reason to respond. This is not necessarily a non-critical position though. So in apathy, I suck, I'm a failure, what's the point? That's apathy, right? So you've assessed the situation. You're not feeling very confident with you feel like you're failing anyways, so you might as well quit. How many of you experienced that? Because I have. Right. That might be a freeze response. Don't do anything because you're going to fail anyways. Okay, fawn. Fawn is actually, I think, a variation of fighting. Don't you guys think, fawning being pleading, please, 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 I'll do whatever. What, don't you agree that might be fight mode? Have any of you here done that? I sure have, right? A little younger, dating. I think I mentioned this last week too. How many of you here have wanted to change the sense of yourself so that maybe someone else will like you? Like, I'll like their music. I'm going to abandon what's real for me because I'm really wanting them to approve of me. So doing everything you can to learn anything about this person or group, taking it on and internalizing it as something that you like dressing, clothing, hair, whether it's friends, a love interest, a religious thought, a political thought, a religious concept, or go anywhere you can imagine, like a sorority. Oh, they do their hair like this, I'm going to do my hair like that, right? That's blending in, but it's also fawning, like pleading to be included, wanting to comply to their will. Again, survival response. There has been benefit at some point that we still do it today. Oops. You abandon your own needs to serve someone else's, so that gives you maybe a sense of, if you have a sense of need, someone needs you, then I might be more secure in my position with my group, right? This is fawning to your group, to your spouse, to your significant other. How many of you here have heard about codependency? How about the drama triangle? So I'm going to go over this quickly. Codependency is a really dysfunctional way to have a relationship. And it doesn't have to be a relationship with a person. It can be a relationship with food, well, we are codependent with food. So let's not use that as an example. That's a fact. That's a physiological thing. So it's how we relate to community. So think third hierarchy of needs. And of course, I'm just in simple here. So when you're in a codependent relationship, you know, there's interaction between you and this other thing or person, right? There's interaction. And it helps both of you, right? Two people together can help each other tremendously. So the problem is when let's just say there's 100% complete with both of you together, working together. You could provide this on your own, but it's more efficient to do it together, right? So in a code, this is dependency. This is great. We depend on each other all the time. There's nothing wrong with depending on people, right? However, codependency is when this person gives this much and they don't have a sense they can do this, right? So they only have 50% to give and will give and can only give. So this person says, oh, I'm going to help this person out. I'm going to rescue this person and I will give all of that and more. And this person says, oh my God, you did that for me. I love you. Belonging, right? But this person has to give 150%. So what this person gets, if this is the person fawning, is they get love. This is the part that's like a little hard. They get this belonging and inclusion. So they spend more, but they get a sense of importance. They get a sense of community and belonging, but it's required 150%. This person, what does this person get out of this? Into codependency. What is the person that is a lot of times is considered the victim? The victim who, for me, a lot of times it's like if you think of a prince in a castle and the damsel in distress, this would be the person that's like the damsel in distress, but I like to call it the victim because it's male, female, and anything more. You're the victim, I can't do this. Oh shit, I can do it, I'll help you. Right? And then, so what does this person get out of this? Yes, who said that? Sympathy. What would sympathy provide in terms of our survival? Importance. Of course, your living needs, right? So we're talking belonging. Yes, that would be the belonging part, right? You get to feel important. Someone is caring for me. My needs are being met. So what happens, and this is kind of constant in a lot of relationships, but what happens is when it's really tipped like this. The victim, the rescuer feels important and needed. So if I feel needed, the victim feels important and they also get supported, right? There's always a third thing in a codependent relationship, and it's the persecutor. What is the persecutor in terms of survival? What would the persecutor symbolize? The threat, right? Threat, rescuer, victim. Okay, so in codependency, there is this bizarre belonging shift where the victim is being persecuted by a threat, and then the rescuer takes over. This is a really short way of looking at it, but in, let's say, addiction, let's look at an addictive substance. Which position, so we have three positions here. We have the victim, we have the rescuer, And we have the persecutor, which is, you know, the threat. This is the safety. Where is substance use? Where does that land in this relationship? Who thinks it's the rescuer? Right, who thinks it's the victim? Persecutor. It can go between the persecutor and the rescuer. Right, and typically a substance is the rescuer. Right, why would it become a persecutor? Let's use, go ahead.
Well, like if you're drinking all the time to make yourself feel better, drinking all the time is gonna make you feel worse about yourself. So then it becomes a bad thing when you keep doing it. So then it becomes-
Yes, you are correct. So I will use like binge eating or emotional eating as an example. So in the moment someone feels like an emotion, let's say abandonment, rejection, disapproval, they're starting to feel the threat of those things socially. And they want to distract, so they're gonna go to food. They eat their food, they start to feel better. When would this food, how would this food then become their persecutor? When they gain weight, because they're gonna get persecuted for their body fat. Is the fat, and you see how that can confuse people? The consequence, so when you said alcohol, the consequence can often be the persecutor. So it can really make people confused around, why do I need this alcohol? Because I'm a victim to it, it's causing all of this drama in my life. I forgot to go to class, or I was too hungover to go to class, and now my grades are going down because I'm a victim of the alcoholism. But I need it to rescue me, right, from my feelings of inadequacy, my social anxiety. I feel like I'm more fun, I can actually hang out with people when I have a little bit of drunk, right? So you can see how we cope can be a rescuer. And when you rely on it too much, you get weaker. That's the other part of codependency, or this is called a, you want to look it up, it's really interesting. This is called the drama triangle. A lot of relationships in a drama triangle. There's the victim, oh, poor me. There's the, again, rescuer, and then there's always a persecutor. That person did this to me. Why won't you help me? A lot of, anyways, I don't need to go further than that, but look that up. So a lot of times when someone is in survival mode, when they don't have a sense of competence, they will look outside themselves to find that competency. And then that becomes really important to your feeling of safety. And the more you use that thing or person or substance or ideology or belief system, give you a sense of safety, the less able you are to handle those things that were the problem. So you get weaker. How many of you here are in kinesiology? Right, so what happens when you stop working out? What's the phrase? Use it or lose it. I know I asked the question and then I answer it. This is the same thing in terms of relationship wise. If you don't put yourself in positions to feel insecure, you don't get stronger at it, you get weaker. So the more you go out socially and have to use your vape or a drink to get drunk to feel just good, the more you're not learning how to develop competence. Develop confidence in yourself, confidence, resilience. You get weaker, right? Just like muscle atrophy. You lose that emotional muscle. And then what happens to the need then for your coping behavior that gives you, that rescues you? So if you're becoming weaker, what happens to you as a victim? You get bigger victiming, right? The persecutor can feel harder for you. Life, it just snowballs, right? So you become more and more codependent. You're not just dependent now on the substance or the person or the belief system. You are now codependent, which means without it, you have nothing. You get weaker and weaker and weaker. So this is how I ended up having so much problems in such a radical way is I never faced my beliefs that were so judgy. I escaped with exercise and this idea that I would look good. And that became my codependent thing to feel good about myself. So I became obsessed, right? And it got worse as I went. The anxiety got worse. My sensitivity to feeling shitty about what I ate got worse. I became codependent with dieting and exercise. So to let it go, I had to feel my insecurity. And by the time I let it go, my sense of self and my sense of security was like nothing, right? So the problem with codependency is it creates this unbalanced sense of power. The rescuer has all the power and you as the victim feel powerless. And again, then that means if you, your persecutor becomes even more persecuting. Any questions? I know that's complicated, but it's really not. I'm making it sound complicated. So narcissists love people. Narcissists first and foremost, they love people to rescue them because it feeds their sense of self-importance. I'm important. Why aren't you doing this for me? You're not behaving correctly for me. You need to be my person, my fawn, right? So in relationships, people who have this issue, okay, love rescuers. They love them. It is the best thing ever. They don't necessarily like to rescue because that's a lot of work. They don't feel it is their obligation to help or rescue someone else. They love someone to come to their rescue. Okay, quickly, flop, fainting, loss of physical control. Flop is normal. This would mean, again, it goes into the apathy side of things. Loss of physical control, grief, loss of will to live, failures, permanently altering one's sense of self. I have definitely been here. Okay, so really what they have found and what, if you look at the cognitive behavioral techniques for people who had traumatic PTSD, traumatic experiences, and not only that, but traumatic relationships. How many of you here have heard about complex PTSD? Briefly, complex PTSD is small doses of traumatic events in relationships. So they're hard to recognize. Versus like a typical single bout, like I saw my friend get hit by a car. I went to war and saw devastating things. Those are typically like very obvious. You can resolve this with lots of different types of therapies, but complex PTSD is harder to see. They usually find this in prostitutes, religious cults, where you've been traumatized by someone of threatening abandonment, threatening disapproval. Authoritarian styles of punishment that you might not have recognized as abuse, right? So people that are in codependent relationships often have complex PTSD, especially if they've been in a relationship with a narcissist that requires you be their slave, right? So what they have found as the most effective mode to help this is facing your weakness, letting your weakness exist, not judging the weakness. Because again, fight or flight and all these responses are there because you believe you are incapable of an outcome, right? That's where stress has started. The self-assessment against an external stimuli that you don't think you can handle increases the stress, right? Which then increases those fight or flight flop responses. The more fearful you are of the outcome, the more intense the outcome. It all starts with a sense of inability. So going into that sense of inability and not judging it, because if you judge your sense of inability when there's a stressful situation, what response are you going to have? Just make a guess. If you're judging your sense, think a little harder. If you're judging, you're shaming, your sense of weakness. What are you most likely to have? You can flight, sure. But there is still some sense of competence in flight. Don't you think? Well, surrender is not judgment, but you're close. Freeze or flop, right? You're more likely to go into hiding. You're more likely to isolate yourself because you're judging that response. You're critical of it. You're shaming yourself, saying, I suck. I'm a terrible person. So first thing is to not judge or criticize. To actually have the courage, because in order for you to have the courage to feel the weakness that is inevitably there because of the stress or how you're responding to the stress or why you think you can't handle the stress, you have to not judge it. If you're judging the fact that you're feeling stressed, you're not gonna face it. Because you're saying that you are worthless. You're basically discrediting your value. Does this make sense? If you are judging your stress or feelings of weakness, you will not face them. You are going to flop, you're gonna hide, okay? So the key to beginning this process is to stop criticizing that response. You're a normal human being. Fear is real. Everybody has it, right? What if you're weak? So what? Why are you judging the weakness, right? So the key to courage, which is really what they have found to be significant change in how we function, how the brain functions and how this fight or flight response functions, is to be willing to accept that you might literally be too weak to handle this problem. You might. If you're willing to admit that and accept that without criticism, you might then have the courage to just feel what the consequence might be. You're more willing to actually accept what the truth might be. Okay. So to face the response, to face the situation, to face this overwhelming circumstance without judgment requires courage. That's what courage and humility is. We talked about humility last week. Does anybody remember really what it is? I just said it basically. Go ahead. Yeah, without criticism. Humility is a willingness to accept you're wrong, that you might be too weak, that you might not be the best, that you might be inadequate, right? Without judgment. That there is a sense of humility involved in it. Because there is a difference from pity, right? Or feeling like, if you're judging that weakness, your response is then going to be, poor me, self-pity, I'm the victim here, I'm in fear. See, that creates this whole situation. I'm a terrible person. That's not humility, actually. That's the opposite. Because you're judging as if you're the authority of what's right and wrong. That's pretty narcissistic, self-centered, right? So humility means that you come to an agreement and an acceptance of whatever that truth is. And you're not shaming or self-deprecating. If you're feeling sorry for yourself, having a pity party, you're not here. Okay? So the key here is that you are willing to find out the truth and you're not going to judge it. That's courage. That takes humility. That's this. You're willing to kind of surrender. So the word surrender was right, but the difference is surrendering means it's willful. I'm willing to find out the truth. And even if the truth is not good, I have to accept that truth. Can you see how that accepting of the truth before you know what it is removes all the work that goes into fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop? Am I confusing you? You're going to want to really know this information because this right here is empowerment. This is super empowering, and this is where people can change everything. If you're willing to face the truth of whatever it is that's threatening you, right? It's usually not this obvious. It's probably abandonment, rejection, disapproval, right? It's that third hierarchy of need, because I'm pretty sure none of you here are starving and you have a place to live. At least I would hope. Any fight or flight response is probably coming from the third hierarchy of need. fear of abandonment, rejection, disapproval, being seen as inadequate. All of that is what you're probably experiencing. If you're shaming that, you're fucked. Stop. The willingness to find out if I am really weak to handle this situation, I want to allow myself to feel that, not judge it, not be self-pitying, "Ooh, poor me," which is not acceptance. Once you're willing to accept the truth, you're literally sitting there vulnerable, right? Because you're not doing anything about it. You're not excusing or lying about it. So this would be like someone finds out that you were cheating on them. You could lie, you could manipulate the whole situation, you could turn it on them, right? You can blame them for why you're cheating. That's fighting, that's narcissistic, right? But if you're willing to say, you know what, it's true, I'm unhappy in this relationship, I feel, what would come out of that? If you're willing to tell the truth, you're no longer vulnerable, or excuse me, you're no longer manipulating the situation. You're no longer, right, having to do whatever it is you're doing to try to maintain that relationship. So if you're to tell the truth, that means you're willing for the relationship to end. I'm going to use the other side of it, because I think this one might be a little more clear. You find out, or let me rephrase it this way. How many of you here, if given a sheet of paper, let's just imagine you're in a committed relationship, every single one of you. And someone says, on this piece of paper will tell you if this person is wanting and will cheat on you or not. How many of you would open it? Now think this through. You really want to know. How many of you would be scared to open it? Right, do you want to know? Why do you think you'd be scared to open it?
You really like them and don't want the answer to be yes, so you just.
Yeah. That would be Bree's response. Yeah, the pain, you don't want the pain, and you kind of are saying the same thing, right? Right, the possible end of it. How many of you would want to know? Imagine you're married and have kids with this person. Let's go deeper. You're married, have a child with this person. Now do you want to look? Right? Easy to say that, but when you're in it, the consequences are bigger, right? The bigger consequence could stimulate a more intense fight or flight response, more suffering, more consequences, more loss, more grief, right? You can see why someone would not want to know. What would it take for someone to open that piece of paper? What would that take? Right? What were you going to say?
They have to be ready for the consequence, whatever.
Correct. Willingness to face the consequence, the change of the relationship, the possible change of the lives, the whole thing, right? The layers and layers. It takes courage to be willing to face that. And on some level, I mean, how do you know you can handle it? You have a sense of being able to handle it, you might be more willing to face it, right? Let's just say you're dependent on each other financially. Would that complicate things? Right. Just think of how complicated relationships can get. So I think about me, okay? I'm gonna use my example. If I gained weight, I would have to have the courage to eat, right? To then find out. I'd have to let go of all my diets. I'd have to let go of all of my exercise, all the things I was doing to fight and flee from the weight gain. I'd have to quit. To then find out the truth. Allow my body to gain fat. My mind was telling me I was going to be 500 pounds because that's how much I was exercising, right? The willingness to find out meant that I had to be willing to not just physically gain the weight and be visibly different, but I had to find out, I have to be willing then to be okay being shamed and judged by people, because it is something that is stigmatized in our culture. right? I would have to be willing, I'd have to have the courage to maybe lose my scholarship as an athlete. I had to have the courage to do that, right? You can imagine the moment I was willing to let those coping behaviors go, the freedom I felt ultimately. It was very difficult. That I was free from all of the damage of the coping mechanism. So take codependency. If my rescuer is my dieting and my exercise behavior, and I let that go, I'm left as me as a victim of what? To fend for myself in a different way. And I didn't. I chose not to fend for myself because I wanted to know the truth. So in short, this is really important. If you're struggling with anxiety and depression, this is really important. The willingness to face what you might not know because you've been coping, you've been like running, you've been hiding, you've been like, whatever the impulse is. Smoking, right? How are you going to quit smoking if you're not willing to face whatever that smoking might be doing for you? Or drinking, getting drunk. You're not willing to face it, you're probably not going to quit. You can think that the consequences suck and be a victim or persecuted by the consequences, but if you're not willing to face what that behavior is protecting you from without judgment, you're probably not going to get better, right? So in this really intense conversation where I'm jumping all over the place, I think the main thing to come out from this in terms of fight or flight is don't judge it. Don't judge yourself. Don't judge the sense of weakness you might have underneath all that. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not a bad person, right? If you're scared, if there was a child that was super scared, would you judge them for being scared at night? Be like, you piece of shit. What's wrong with you? No, you would be like, that's really normal. And that's like, you're okay, you know? Let's sit with it. What would happen? Let's talk about the monsters under the bed. You might be a little bit more loving and kind about the situation. For me, am I really a bad person if I have weight? Like I had to go through and have compassion and kindness for myself because I was so scared of those consequences because I was judging myself because of it. So to actually have compassion, and the research on compassion is huge. It's game changing because it literally biologically changes your body. It biologically reduces fight or flight. When you're shaming and judging yourself, you're the one triggering fight or flight on top of the beliefs that you're holding yourself to that might be really intense. So compassion ultimately is forgiving you from your beliefs. So if I had compassion, for example, for myself, because I had sex before marriage, if I had compassion for the fact that I actually participated in that sex because I thought this person would like me, I was fawning. I had sex with men because I thought they'd like me. Isn't that funny, actually? Knowing what I know now and all of you men out there. No, that's usually not the case. You're just thinking, I'm horny. She's horny. Let's go. That wasn't my situation. But it would be, be easy to assume that. Especially if, let's say, this person is like watching tons of porn. They might think that, oh, women like that. That's what she wants. Or women doing the same thing with men. I'm not being on men. But for me, I literally was trying to feel worthy of love and inclusion and then had sex thinking that that's how I would get it. All the while traumatizing myself because I was shaming myself because my religious indoctrination telling me that I'm worthless to God and my family, right? So abandonment, rejection, disapproval from God, from my religious ideology, from my family, from myself, because I believed all of that. So you can imagine how intense my fight or flight response was from having sex with someone because I'm fawning. So when I finally said, that's really stupid of me, actually, of this belief set, to shame me for that, I was trying to be loved. Should I really feel that I'm a terrible person? Would a Would a just and loving God want me to go to burn in hell because I was trying to feel included or liked by someone? Probably not. It took me literally to forgive the beliefs, to then change my biology, to reduce the shame, which completely eliminated my fight or flight response. Okay. There's so much more. Do you guys have a headache yet? I'm not kidding. Mental health is so big in this country, specifically in college students. It is such a big issue. It is called an epidemic in this specific group of people. Why? What's the difference? And why is it in the United States and not other places? Similarly, doesn't mean it's not everywhere in the whole world, because this is evolutionary, right? Why is it here?
So my culture is very like masculine and achievement oriented. Can't achieve with the text. For like other cultures, more feminine, where they value like family, community, food.
Right. It sucks that it's being defined by masculine and femininity when it shouldn't be. Because that really is, those are attributes of being narcissistic, which is male and female, right? So let's take the gender out of it, the sex out of it. Maybe our culture is more narcissistic. It's really not about your sex. It's about the narcissism. Why would that be? Let's talk about that. What is the, I love what you said, because I think you're getting the essence, but I'm gonna change your language.
The idea of America in a way is narcissistic. We believe we're kind of better than everybody else. So if we're not constantly conforming to like that idea of the country translates into our everyday lives, that we have to be better than other people. We have to achieve this high standard of the American.
Yes, that would be a definite definition of being narcissistic. It is the superiority. It is saying I am superior to you, you're inferior to me. It's very hierarchical. You guys know what a hierarchy is? Anybody want to explain a hierarchy? And I'm supposed to have the class interact. Yeah. A hierarchy, think of the pyramid. Think of a pyramid. This is the king, the queen. King, queen, the most superior of them all. But this is in terms of value, so you need to know value-wise, power, decisions, right? In a hierarchical system, that means that there's there's classes of value in what your worth is to the system. And it's built like this, the most, it's like a pecking order. Pecking order to the least. Where in terms of our survival, you can see this is definitely evolutionary. May serve a purpose in some contexts. This might be really beneficial in military positions. Even in medicine, there's hierarchy because let's say I always think Grey's Anatomy. You guys watch Grey's Anatomy? It's seriously a love Grey's Anatomy. It's one of those guilty pleasures of mine, but I don't feel guilty about it. Anyways, you kind of need people who are experts, who really, really understand things to make ultimate decisions, right? And someone who's like low in, in terms of medicine, they probably shouldn't be given a ton of power because they don't necessarily understand everything. So it's not necessarily hierarchical, but it's this idea of I'm superior to you. My worth and belonging is where this gets really roughed up. That someone at a higher level is more worthy of life than you, right? So, narcissistic culture, we are definitely hierarchical. Anybody else have any ideas why the United States, especially college students in particular, are suffering so much with fight, flight, and then the depression is the chronic issue with that and feeling hopeless about it? Anybody agree with the like, we're held to this idea of we have to be superior. Right, that's the narcissistic nature, probably of culture, And there's probably subcultures that might be more intensely that way than others, right? So why there might be pockets of it. More so than others. Any questions? Before we leave, but we got a few more minutes, I want to go over this, the map of consciousness. I'm gonna do this as quickly as I can. So I want you to look at this picture and let's divide this into fight or flight, right? Or not fight or flight. So we're going from so if we look at the way we are when we are insecure versus the way we are when we're secure, right? I want you to, in your mind, think about like, what would it be like to win? Because this is how our culture is and our system works. You just won $100 freaking million. Where are you going to be at on this map? No food issues, no shelter issues, all combined power, right? Probably for your children and grandchildren. That would feel really good, right? So you will probably have some degree of like joy for a little bit, right? You're going to come out of this. That might not get rid of your sense of worth because there's competition with the rich. Your boat is not big enough. Your yacht is not big enough. You're not driving the nicest car. You need more power. So you're going to be judged by people who are in the same class, right? Because it's narcissistic. So basically the map of consciousness is really looking at these stages of fight, inflation, right? Willingness to fight, the anger, I'm a victim, I'm gonna fix this. I have enough desire, right? That would be also in there to work hard at this. So, and then as you go down this direction, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, shame. So what is this really a grade of behind here? When we look at how we come to fight or flight, the sense of capacity, the more capable you have with a threat, you might go up. The less capable you feel, you might go down. And then all of this, on some level, requires some type of moral judgment. And you can come out of this. This is where there's a lot that goes into this, but these are the higher parts of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Self-actualization, cognitive. This is really where a lot of the cognitive things, you can think of like when we looked at aesthetic needs, accepting all things as they are is amazing. The infinite space of reality is awesome. That's really where we start going up. So this is another way of describing what Maslow has studied from a level of how we experience consciousness in here. And I don't need to go any further, but we'll get into that. I'll go start here. Please remind me on Wednesday to not go into fight or flight anymore. But we're going to start with consciousness. All right. Have a good one. We'll see you Wednesday. I will upload this if you want to watch it again.
My RA told me never heard any.
You're welcome.